this gospel, we return back to the Gospel of Mark now after having been spending some time with the Gospel of John in chapter 6, the Bread of Life discourse, where the Lord spoke about the true presence, his true presence in the Eucharist. But now we return to Mark, and our readings today remind us of the goodness of the gift that God gives us in the law. As we heard in our second reading today from St. James, all good gifts are from above. And in fact, God doesn't give bad gifts, right? Every gift that God gives is a good gift. So even his laws are good things for us. They are for our good, and they are able to set us free and give us life in its fullness. And so Jesus speaks to us today about the importance of the law. However, the problem that sometimes comes up of human tradition sort of adding to the law. We heard in the first reading from Deuteronomy that we should not add or take away anything from the law that God has given us. And sometimes when we add to God's law, we may end up taking away emphasis and therefore taking away some of God's law as well, therefore perhaps causing problems. But as Jesus reminds us today, it is in our own hearts, in the sort of core of the human person, not quite the core, but there inside us is where the problem is. We sometimes have a tendency in our culture to blame everything around us for the mistakes that we make, and that there are factors involved, certainly, but our freedom is still our own. And that sort of concupiscence, that tendency towards sin, that fallenness is within us. And Jesus came not just to help us get everything right on the outside, but to fix the problem where it truly is, right here in our hearts. That is the gift that his victory has won for us, that we can begin to be transformed in our hearts. The saints are reminders of that for every one of us. They are people who have, by God's grace, allowed him to truly heal and transform their hearts so that they are no longer really selfish, that their lives really are oriented towards love, 99.9% of the time, or maybe even 100. So they're perfect examples to us of the transformation that God wishes to do with us. And the Lord desires to do this through guiding and directing us. You know, he sets up a law, a sort of order of commandments that are meant to set us free. We look at the 10 Commandments, and perhaps we simply just see rules, which for us as Americans with our great sense of libertarianism, which is not a good thing, we can sort of look at those rules as bad things, as some way restricting us. But really the truth is that these rules can actually make us free. They can give us something good and beautiful. And for many in our society who religion is not something that they really care about or really understand, they look at the rules in the church and see them as silly. We live in a society that promotes relativism, ultimately saying that, you know, you can't have universal rules because right and wrong are not universal. And so people can sort of scoff off rules, especially in regards to morality or religious living and the proper way to worship God, as we know in the gift of the Mass, and to pray to the Lord in spirit and in truth in Christ Jesus. But many people don't see that. And yet, for things that they do care about, they're all about all kinds of rules, whether it's sports or how they are to diet or the most important ways to live their life and what movies are better than others, etc. All of these things people really, really care about, and they actually even set up rules around lots of different things. One example that I have a great joy in sharing with you today is the way one of my brothers, who will remain nameless but happens to be a pastor not many miles away, really enjoys coffee and all of the rules around how to get the best cup of coffee. When we were in seminary was when he began to be infected with this obsession. My brother doesn't have hobbies. He has obsessions that he just rolls through from one to the next. And this one was something that took him during that time of seminary when my uncle, who runs the best coffee shop in Illinois, started showing us and teaching us how to roast our own coffee beans. So my brother started buying green coffee beans and roasting them in the proper way so that he would have freshly roasted coffee beans, coffee grounds. Well, he would not grind them until it was time to brew the coffee, because that's one of the rules. But he had so many rules around it. I tried to write down some of them. You know, of course, it's very important to have the water at the right temperature. So he would wake up in the morning, he'd start boiling that water. And then, because the boiler, it would boil it too far, he had his thermometer to measure. He knew that he needed to, after it boiled and turned off, he needed to wait like 22 seconds before pouring that water, like to get it to the exact temperature. So he eventually realized, after practicing, exactly how long he needed to wait. That's my brother. And then, as you're doing that, as the water's boiling, you ground those coffee beans so that you have your coffee grounds, but you have to have your ratios perfect. So depending on how much coffee you want, then you want the right amount of coffee grounds for that. So he has to weigh those coffee grounds, because you do it by weight. So he weighs them, and then he pours them into the filter and waits for that water to finish boiling and the timer for it to cool down just a little bit. Pours that in, but you don't just pour in any amount of water. You have to have the exact amount of milliliters to get that perfect ratio of grounds to water so that you can, after the exact amount of time, starting the timer and letting it beep, then immediately pouring it into your coffee cup. All of these rules so that, oh, by the way, no sugar and no cream, because those are ways to mess up your coffee, apparently. All of this so that you can enjoy coffee bliss. And so my brother would go through these rules and routines every morning in seminary, very methodically, so that he could enjoy that coffee as he prayed in his room or did his reading in the morning. That's a lot of rules around something, but it's because it was something that was important to him, something that he cared about. When we care about something, we set up rules around it. And for us who wish to not only worship God the way that he wants to, but live a life that is pleasing to him, it makes sense that we have lots of rules around how we live as Christians. But it's important for us to remember that the reason, for example, my brother had all these rules around coffee, around how to brew coffee, was so that he could enjoy the bliss of a good cup of coffee, of having coffee at its best. That best cup of coffee is the purpose for all of the rules. And if you forget why you're doing what you're doing, then the rules start to make no sense. G.K. Chesterton described this about 100 years ago when he spoke about rules in Catholic life, and he gave a beautiful image for us. So I'll read a quote from his book, Orthodoxy. "Those countries in Europe which are still influenced by priests are exactly the countries where there is still singing and dancing and colored dresses and art in the open air. Catholic doctrine and discipline may be walls, but they are the walls of a playground. Christianity is the only frame which has preserved the pleasure of paganism. We might fancy some children playing on the flat, grassy top of some tall island in the sea. So long as there was a wall round the cliff's edge, they could fling themselves into every frantic game and make the place the noisiest of nurseries. But the walls were knocked down, leaving the naked peril of the precipice. They did not fall over, but when their friends returned, they were all huddled together in terror in the center of the island, and their song had ceased." And so we see the importance of boundaries. They provide us that safe place to have joy, to, as he says, dance, to have colored dresses and art and sing. this is the beauty of why we have rules for us as Christians. And so we must not forget the point of what it's all about, and we must truly live the joyful life that we are called to. Those two things have to go hand in hand. In order for us as Christians, as Catholics, to be a witness in our world today, to help others to grow closer to the Lord, to want to be drawn into this life as well, to share it well as true evangelists, then we have to, yes, follow the rules and support them and really uphold them to truly be a Catholic in the fullness. But secondly, that our song must never cease, that we must truly be witnesses of the joy that we have, that we can't forget the purpose of those rules, which is to have this fullness of life with God, to have this joy and peace that the world cannot give and the world cannot take away. The world needs both of these to be convinced of the truth that we have and why they should fall in line with worshiping the Lord this way. So don't confuse the rules with the purpose of the rules, and make sure that you live them both in their fullness. That indeed is what will draw others to the Lord.